When we think of Jesus' life on earth, it is one of wisdom, strength, and power. He displayed power over the nature, calming storms and winds and waves, over dark spiritual forces, casting out many demons, over sickness and disease, healing many, giving sight to the blind, making the lame walk, healing lepers, and over death, raising to life a centurion's daughter, a widow's son, and even his friend Lazarus after he'd been dead for 4 days. He displayed his wisdom in the answers that he gave to the religious rulers who were constantly trying to trip him up, only to find that they themselves were stumped for words. His wisdom was in his teachings, with even some non-religious people today still wanting to hold on to his Christian values. And also then in his ability to see into the heart and mind of a person. He showed strength in the way he stood up to the authorities of the day, renouncing their abuses of power and overturning the tables of exploitative money changers in the temple. He also displayed his strength of character in heading to Jerusalem when he knew he was going to be betrayed and murdered. He doesn't run from it, but explains to his disciples what is to take place. In all his wisdom, power and strength, we probably see more of his divine nature at work and can be tempted to think that Jesus just took the whole journey to the cross in his stride. But in our passage today, we gain an insight into his human side. Jesus was both 100% God and 100% human. In our Gospel reading from Matthew 26, beginning at verse 36, Jesus and his disciples are in the Garden of Gethsemane. He takes aside his 3 closest companions, Peter, James and John. These are the 3 who had witnessed his transfiguration on the mountain. But on this night, they witness a very different transfiguration. He is grieved and distressed, and so he takes his most faithful followers and says to them, "My soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death. Stay here and keep watch with me." Or as another translation puts it, "My soul is deeply grieved unto death. Stay awake with me." What an admission for the Son of God to make. His soul is deeply grieved to death. What does that look like? We read from verse 39, "Going a little farther, he fell with his face to the ground and prayed, 'My Father, if it is possible, may this cup be taken from me. Yet not as I will, but as you will.'" Jesus desperately doesn't want to go through with the ordeal which lays before him. He still wants to do the will of the Father, but he wants the Father to take the cup of suffering away from him, if that's possible. We see this desperation expressed in the words that he uses, in his posture as he falls face down to the ground. And as Luke declares in chapter 22, verse 44, "And being in anguish, he prayed more earnestly, and his sweat was like drops of blood falling to the ground." Jesus is staring into the abyss of the world's sin. We may get distressed at the physical suffering Jesus endured, but that is nothing compared with having to face and deal with the abyss of our sin and the sin of the whole world. We cannot begin to imagine what that was like, but it is so distressing for Jesus that his body began reacting and producing sweat like blood, translated literally as clots of blood falling to the ground. Such was his anguish that Jesus didn't stop with asking just once for the cup to be taken from him. There were, according to Matthew, 3 periods of prayer with that as the core request. His second period of prayer, we see a slight shift in Jesus. The first time he had asked for that cup to be taken from him. The second time he prays, If it is not possible for this cup to be taken away unless I drink it, may your will be done. It's more of a resignation here that he might have to drink this cup to go through that suffering. We're told he prayed the same thing for a third time. But after this final period of prayer, he is now ready to meet his betrayer. In the meantime, what are his closest friends doing in his greatest hour of need, after he has confessed to them the deep anguish of his soul and asked them to keep watch with him? Well, they slept. Not just the first time. Even after being woken by Jesus in his despair the first time, they went back to sleep again. The second time, Jesus doesn't even bother waking them. The flesh is indeed weak, and his friends had failed in their support of him. How alone he must have felt as he wrestled with the agony within. His three closest companions had failed him in his greatest hour of need. They wouldn't have been able to do anything about Jesus' situation, but much support can be given by just being there for a friend in need, so that they don't feel quite so alone. Jesus had no support from his friends, but he still had his Heavenly Father. It is to my Father to whom he prays each time. And as he prays, there is a shift from the anguished desperation not to drink the cup to finding the strength to face his betrayer and all that lay ahead, holding on to the conviction, your will be done. Jesus had come to do the Father's will. Even in the moment when he faced the unfaceable, he prayed as he had taught his disciples to pray, your will be done. And then walked that path of obedience, doing the Father's will, even unto death. Jesus modelled what he taught. He prayed, your will be done. And although his situation didn't change, prayer changed him so that he could step out in obedience to do the Father's will. There's a great example for us. Jesus can identify with the most intense agony we ever have to face. He knows what it is like to desperately want the cause to be taken away. But in the end, the most important thing to pray is, your will be done. God doesn't promise to change our situation, but he does promise to transform us and to support us through it. And Jesus is the one who has made that possible. He has done what we couldn't do in dealing with the abyss of sin, including our sin, so that God's will may be done in our lives. This Maundy Thursday, what does it mean for you to pray with Jesus, your will be done? With that in mind, we now move to a time of prayer.